The stars were wrong. That was the first thing the navigation officer noticed, seconds before the alarms began to whisper instead of scream. The refugee fleet had been running blind for 3 days, fleeing an enemy no sensor could track and no weapon could slow. Thousands of ships, civilian, military, broken, burning, had poured into the final coordinate left on the ancient charts. A place spoken of only in warnings. A corridor that had once saved the galaxy in a war no one alive remembered. They expected defenses. They expected guardians. They expected something. Instead, they found silence. Not the normal quiet of space. This was heavier, pressed tight against the hulls. Stars ahead flickered as if unsure they were allowed to exist. Whole constellations ended abruptly, cut off by a vast region of darkness where space itself looked scarred. The fleet slowed as one. Engines idled. No one gave the order. Instinct did. Long-range sensors reached out and recoiled. Readings came back fractured, incomplete. Radiation patterns made no sense. Gravitational echoes repeated where no mass should be. It was as if the universe had been wounded here and never fully healed. Command, the navigation officer said, voice tight. This region shows signs of artificial manipulation, on a scale I can't quantify. Before the commander could respond, a new alert appeared. Not a threat warning. A signal. Weak. Fragmented. Buried beneath centuries of static. The refugee fleet pivoted, antennae aligning, systems straining to isolate it. At first it sounded like noise, broken pulses, uneven gaps, an ancient transmission degraded by time and distance. Then the pattern emerged. It was repeating. Again, and again, and again. The commander felt a chill run through her secondary hearts. Is it a distress call? No. The signal analyst replied slowly. It's a warning. The translation software struggled. The language was old. Older than most known civilizations. Several symbols didn't exist in modern databases. But the signal kept adjusting, rewriting itself, as if it were learning. The first translated words finally appeared on the main display. This zone is closed. Murmurs rippled through the command deck. Closed meant occupied. Or protected. Hope flared. Dangerous, fragile hope. The commander leaned forward. Boost resolution. I want full context. The signal sharpened. The words expanded. Do not advance. Do not signal. Do not wake what is still working. That hope twisted into unease. Outside the viewport, the darkness ahead shifted. For a moment, just a moment, the stars behind it seemed to bend inward, like light caught in the pull of something vast and unseen. A junior officer spoke before he could stop himself. There are no energy signatures. No fleets. No stations. Nothing that could generate a warning like this. The analyst swallowed. Unless whatever built it isn't active. The fleet commander's gaze locked on the scarred void. She knew the history. Everyone did. Long ago, there had been a species that refused to join the galactic order. Violent. Unstable. Brilliant in short, terrifying bursts. They had predicted a great external threat. They had proposed a solution no one else would accept. They had vanished soon after. Official records listed them as extinct. Unofficial ones called them a cautionary tale. The signal pulsed again. Stronger now. New lines forced their way onto the display, translated with unsettling clarity. This region was not abandoned. A tremor passed through the deck as something deep within the dark zone activated. Not a weapon. Not a shield. A presence. Sensors spiked and died. Timestamps jittered. A distant star went out, not in an explosion, but as if someone had turned it off. The final line of the signal resolved. Clean. Sharp. Undeniable. Turn back. We are still holding. And for the first time since the war began, the refugee fleet realized something far worse than being alone. They had reached the place where the galaxy's last defenders had never stopped fighting. No one spoke for a long time after the warning ended. The refugee fleet hung at the edge of the scarred region, engines whispering, hulls creaking as if the ships themselves felt the pressure of what lay ahead. Millions of lives waited in that silence. Children sleeping in cargo bays. Wounded soldiers strapped to floors. Civilizations reduced to whatever could flee fastest. Behind them was annihilation. Ahead of them was a place that claimed it was still holding a line no one else remembered. The fleet commander finally broke the stillness. Transmit the signal to the Galactic Council. All of it. Unfiltered. Her aides hesitated. Protocol demanded verification. Cross-checks. Consensus. She overrode them. Now, the council chamber had not been full in generations. Its vast rings of seats, built to house hundreds of species, had slowly emptied over centuries of war and retreat. Some seats were dark, their civilizations already gone. Others flickered with emergency projections, delegates broadcasting from ships, bunkers, or worlds already half evacuated. When the refugee fleet's transmission played, the chamber fell silent. The scarred stars, the impossible sensor readings, the warning, and finally, the words, "We are still holding." For a moment, no one understood what they were hearing. Then an elder delegate rose, membranes along her neck paling. Her species had kept records longer than most, longer than they liked to admit. "That phrase," she said slowly, "is familiar." Eyes turned, mandibles stilled, data slates lifted. She gestured, and ancient files appeared in the air, classified, buried, flagged as obsolete. "They were called humans," she continued. "A minor species from a yellow star system. Short-lived, emotion-driven, violent even by our early standards." A murmur passed through the chamber. Humans. The name carried no weight. No empire. No legacy. Just a footnote. "They existed during the first age of expansion," the elders said. "They predicted an external intelligence beyond our galaxy, an entity that consumed systems to propagate itself." Several delegates scoffed. "We all predicted threats," one snapped. "We adapted. We evolved." The elders' gaze hardened. They didn't predict a threat. They predicted this one. The chamber shifted uneasily. Another delegate pulled up additional records. The humans proposed extreme measures. Isolation, strategic withdrawal, weaponization of space-time itself. They wanted to turn entire regions into traps. "Yes," the elder replied. "And when the council rejected their plan, they left." A different voice cut in. "They didn't leave. They vanished." The distinction hung in the air. "What happened to them?" the fleet commander asked from her distant projection. The elder hesitated. "Officially," she said, "they collapsed. Internal conflict, resource exhaustion, self-destruction. That was the narrative we agreed upon." Agreed upon. Unofficially, the records told a different story. Human ships retreating toward a specific sector. Human colonies dismantled instead of defended. Signals deliberately erased. Worlds stripped clean. Star maps altered. "They didn't lose a war," the elder said quietly. "They chose to disappear." The council chamber erupted. Why would any species erase itself? Because they were unstable. Because they failed. Because they were afraid. The elder waited until the noise subsided. "No," she said. "Because they believed someone had to stay behind." While the council argued, the enemy moved. At the edge of the galaxy, stars began to dim. Not explode. Not collapse. Simply fade. Their energy siphoned away by a presence that did not communicate, did not negotiate, and did not slow. The extragalactic entity had no fleets, no cities, no minds in the way other species understood. It was a process. Where it passed, nothing followed. Every civilization that faced it made the same mistakes. They built bigger weapons. They formed alliances too late. They fought for territory instead of time. And they all lost. Now, the entity reached the boundary of the scarred region. It paused. That alone sent shockwaves through long-range observation arrays. The enemy had never paused before, never assessed, never hesitated. The space ahead of it was wrong. Not empty, not defended in any conventional sense. The region was layered with distortions, gravitational scars overlapping in precise patterns. Dead stars placed with mathematical intent. Void pockets where physics stuttered, reset, then continued as if nothing had happened. This was not a battlefield. It was a structure. The entity extended itself forward. Space resisted, not with force, but with absence. The entity's leading edge thinned, its momentum bleeding away into regions where cause and effect no longer lined up cleanly. For the first time since its emergence into this galaxy, the entity lost cohesion. Observation stations watched in disbelief as portions of it simply ceased. Not destroyed, not converted, removed. The data stream spiked. Inside the refugee fleet, alarms finally screamed. "Contact," a sensor officer shouted. Something just activated inside the dark zone. Energy readings surged and vanished. Timestamps disagreed by seconds, then minutes. A defensive lattice flickered into partial existence. Structures too vast to be ships, too deliberate to be natural. Ancient platforms, buried inside dead stars, awakened. They did not fire wildly. They did not chase targets. They waited. The enemy pressed forward again, adapting as it always had. And the region answered. Space folded. Not violently, but precisely. Entire attack vectors vanished into nothing, funneled into dead corridors where the enemy's own momentum unraveled it strand by strand. Across the council chamber, the argument stopped. "What kind of civilization builds this?" someone whispered. The elder's voice was quiet. "One that expected to lose," she said, "and planned anyway." Back at the refugee fleet, the commander watched the distant distortions with mounting dread. "These defenses," she said, "they're ancient, far older than the current galactic era." "Yes," the analyst replied, "but they're still calibrated, still adapting, still learning." Another officer looked up from his console, eyes wide. "Command, we're detecting a transponder signal." "From where?" The officer swallowed. "From the center of the scarred region." It was dormant. It just came online. On the main display, a single identifier resolved. Not a code, a word. The translation software didn't hesitate this time. Human. The commander felt the weight of history settle over her. The galaxy had believed humans were reckless, short-sighted, too emotional to endure. But as she stared into the darkness where the enemy now struggled for the first time, a different truth began to take shape. Humans had not failed. They had stayed. And whatever they had built out there, whatever they had become, it was still standing between the galaxy and oblivion. The transponder pulsed once, then a second time, and somewhere deep inside the dead zone, something massive began to move. The enemy did not rage. It did not recoil in fear or confusion the way lesser species did when confronted with resistance. It simply adjusted. From the edge of the scarred region, the extragalactic mass spread itself thinner, probing the distortions with careful intent. Where space folded inward, it flowed around. Where gravity broke into fragments, it redistributed itself. It learned faster than any opponent the galaxy had ever faced. Normally, that was enough. This time it wasn't. Inside the refugee fleet, sensors screamed as reality ahead of them bent again. Not violently, not spectacularly, but deliberately. Entire vectors of movement vanished. Not blocked, not shielded, removed, as if the universe had quietly decided those paths no longer existed. The first enemy tendril crossed an invisible threshold. It disappeared. No explosion, no energy release. One moment, it occupied a measurable volume of space. The next, every trace of it was gone, down to the quantum noise it should have left behind. A junior sensor officer whispered, That shouldn't be possible." The analyst didn't look away from her console. "It isn't. Not by our physics." Across the fleet, ships drifted closer together, subconsciously tightening formation. Even the largest war cruisers adjusted their posture, turning hulls inward like animals seeking safety in numbers. The enemy pressed again, this time with greater mass, greater redundancy. Where one section vanished, three more followed, attempting to overwhelm whatever mechanism was at work. The region answered with patience. Deep within the dark zone, ancient systems woke fully for the first time in centuries. Not all at once, not dramatically, piece by piece, like a mind stretching after long sleep. Dead stars flared, not with fusion, but with controlled gravitational resonance. Their cores pulsed in mathematically perfect intervals, sending waves through space that did not propagate outward so much as overwrite what was already there. The enemy's structure warped. For the first time, observers detected something like hesitation. Its advance slowed. Portions of it withdrew, reabsorbed into the greater mass as if reconsidering an approach that had never failed before. "This region isn't just defended," the fleet commander said quietly. "It's trained." The words settled uneasily among her officers. Trained implied learning, adaptation, intent over time. That meant someone had been here long enough to teach space itself how to fight. The transponder signal pulsed again. Human. No additional data. No greeting. Just the identifier, steady and unmistakable, broadcasting from the deepest point of the scarred region. "Can we trace it?" the commander asked. "We're trying," the analyst replied. "But every time we narrow the vector, the signal relocates." "Relocates?" "Yes, command. It's not moving in space. It's moving in reference. No one liked that answer. As the enemy regrouped, it changed tactics. Instead of brute advance, it began to alter the environment ahead of it, seeding instability, collapsing minor stars to flood the region with raw energy and debris. The scarred zone absorbed it. Where the energy should have cascaded, it vanished into containment voids hidden between layers of folded space. Where debris should have shattered defenses, it passed through corridors that redirected momentum back toward the enemy itself. The galaxy watched in disbelief. This was not a static defense. This was a conversation. The council chamber erupted again, voices overlapping as live feeds poured in from observation arrays across multiple sectors. The enemy was slowing. Not stopping, but slowing enough for the first time since its arrival. How is this possible? A delegate demanded. No civilization maintained active defenses for this long. The elder delegate remained standing, her gaze fixed on the projections. That is because most civilizations defend borders, she said, not outcomes. She expanded the ancient human records further, unlocking layers few had ever bothered to read. Humans believed war was not about territory, she continued. It was about time, buying it, spending it, deciding who got to have a future. The data showed simulations, thousands of them, not focused on victory, but on delay. Attrition curves stretching across centuries. Sacrifice modeled not in ships lost, but in generations committed. They assumed they would not be thanked, the elders said. They assumed they would not be remembered. Their models did not include survival as a requirement. Silence followed. At the edge of the scarred region, the enemy attempted something unprecedented. It reached backward. Instead of pushing forward, it began to rewrite its own causal chain, reinforcing earlier states to overwhelm the distortions ahead. Reality shuddered as timelines attempted to overlap, probabilities stacking until even the region's defenses strained. Inside the dark zone, alarms finally rang. Not in the refugee fleet. Somewhere far deeper. Ancient systems flagged, thresholds crossed. Calculations updated. Margins narrowed. For the first time, the scarred region escalated. Entire sections of space collapsed inward, not into singularities, but into flat planes where depth ceased to exist. The enemy struck these regions and found nothing to consume, nowhere to propagate. Still, it pushed. The line bent. The refugee fleet watched as sensor readings climbed into ranges marked impossible by every modern textbook. Time dilation spiked. Causality frayed. Light arrived before it was emitted. This is getting worse, the commander said. If the line fails. It won't, the analyst interrupted, then paused. At least, not the way we think. A new signal broke through the static. Not the warning. Not the transponder. A voice. Rough. Human. Tired beyond measure. Unknown vessels. It said, distorted but clear enough. If you can hear this, you are too close. The command deck froze. The voice continued, calm even as the background crackled with interference. We are engaged in containment operations. Your presence increases risk factors. Recommend immediate withdrawal. The commander leaned forward. This is Refugee Coalition Command. We are fleeing the entity you are engaging. We have nowhere else to go. There was a pause. Not a processing delay. A human pause. Understood, the voice replied. Stand by. The channel closed. The transponder flared brighter. Human. From the heart of the scarred region, something vast shifted its orientation. Space warped around it, not resisting, but making room. Sensors strained, barely able to resolve the shape emerging from folded reality. It was not a station, not a platform, not a fleet. It was singular, enormous, scarred by impacts that had never been repaired, only reinforced. Its surface bore the marks of centuries, layered armor plates fused together by necessity rather than design. No elegant curves, no aesthetic symmetry. It looked built to endure. As it moved, the surrounding distortions aligned with it, like trained beasts responding to a master's presence. Defensive structures adjusted positions, corridors reoriented, gravitational wells deepened in its wake. The enemy reacted instantly, diverting mass toward the new arrival. The human vessel did not accelerate. It placed itself between the enemy and the refugee fleet. Nothing more. No threat display. No weapons fire. Just position. Across the galaxy, a realization began to form. Slow, heavy, undeniable. The scarred region had never been the weapon. It had been the terrain. And the thing now emerging from its center was the reason it worked. The human voice returned, quieter now. Closer. We held because we had to, it said. We stayed because someone needed to. The enemy surged, gathering itself for a strike that would have shattered entire sectors elsewhere. The human warship did not move. Space around it tightened, locking into configurations that defied modern understanding. Time itself seemed to slow, as if reluctant to let the next moment arrive. The commander felt it then, not fear. Relief. Because whatever humanity had become out here, whatever price they had paid, one truth was now impossible to ignore. The galaxy had not been abandoned. It had been guarded. And the guard had finally stepped into view. The human warship did not announce itself with fire. That alone unsettled everyone watching. Galactic militaries were built around spectacle. Shields flared to signal strength. Weapons powered up to deter attack. Even ancient defense platforms had followed those assumptions. Visibility equaled dominance. Noise equaled control. The human vessel did neither. It simply existed, vast and immovable, suspended between the enemy and the refugee fleet like a final decision made solid. Sensors struggled to define its boundaries. Every attempt to lock onto a stable outline failed, as if the ship refused to occupy a single frame of reference. One moment it appeared angular and brutal, layered in armor plates that looked welded by hand. The next, parts of it blurred, slipping half a second out of sync with local time. This can't be one ship, a tactical officer muttered. It violates mass constraints. Energy limits. Everything. It is one ship, the analyst replied softly. But it isn't obeying the rules we expect ships to obey. Across the galaxy, data poured in from long-forgotten observation arrays. Human-built, human-abandoned, quietly maintained by systems no one bothered to decommission. They woke now, responding to a signal keyed not to authority, but to identity. Human. The council chamber filled with layered projections. Old star charts overlaid with new sensor feeds. Ancient warnings aligned with current catastrophe. The elder delegate stood again, though no one had asked her to. Humans believe the galaxy misunderstood war, she said. They thought we treated it like a contest. Like something that ended. She expanded a final set of archived human documents. Not military orders. Not battle reports. Personal writings. Letters. Training logs. Educational material. They taught their children that war was a condition, the elder continued. Not an event. Something that could last longer than a single life. Longer than a civilization, if necessary. Images flickered, human habitats stripped of excess, cities dismantled into modular structures, populations deliberately capped. No growth curves. No expansion models. They abandoned empire, the elder said. They abandoned legacy. They chose sustainability over dominance. A delegate scoffed weakly. That sounds like failure. The elder turned slowly. Then why are they the only ones still here? At the edge of the scarred region, the enemy struck. It did not rush blindly this time. It compressed itself, condensing mass and intent into a focused spear that punched toward the human ship with catastrophic force. Space ahead of it fractured under the pressure. Entire dimensions straining as the entity forced its way through pathways it had not fully tested. The human warship responded at last. Not with weapons fire. With denial. Space in front of the ship thickened, as if resistance itself had mass. The enemy's advance slowed, then warped, then smeared across impossible angles as causality fractured under the strain. Energy readings spiked, then flattened. The spear unraveled. Observers watched as the entity's most concentrated assault dispersed into nothing, its structure losing coherence as if stripped of purpose mid-strike. The human ship did not pursue. It didn't need to. This isn't combat, the fleet commander whispered. It's correction. The analyst nodded. They're not destroying it. They're limiting it. Inside the human vessel, systems older than most stars in the region adjusted parameters. Not automatically. Manually. Hands moved over interfaces designed to be repaired, not replaced. Voices exchanged confirmations in a language stripped of ornament, optimized for clarity under stress. A human officer glanced at a long-running counter. Containment duration, 312 years, for months, 11 days. Margin update, he asked. Another voice replied, calm but tight. Margin reduced, but still acceptable. Acceptable meant millions would live. Unacceptable meant extinction. There were no other categories. The human commander stood at the center of the bridge, gray hair pulled back, posture steady despite the strain that showed in his eyes. He had been born long after this war began. So had his parents. So had their parents before them. The war was older than memory. Any response from the galaxy? He asked. Observation channels are saturated, an officer replied. No hostile intent detected. Mostly confusion. The commander exhaled slowly. Good. Confusion buys time. He turned his gaze back to the forward display, where the enemy shifted again, testing, adapting, searching for weakness. Prepare contingency layers, he ordered. And wake Archive 3. A pause followed. Archive 3, someone asked quietly. That's pre-containment. Yes, the commander said. It's time they remembered why we did this. Across the council chamber, the human signal finally opened fully. Not a threat. Not a declaration of superiority. A briefing. The human commander's image resolved, grainy but unmistakable. His face bore the marks of long service, not enhanced, not augmented beyond necessity. We will keep this brief, he said, because time is something we spend carefully. No one interrupted. You are facing an entity that cannot be reasoned with, cannot be frightened, and cannot be defeated through escalation, he continued. We learned this early, at great cost. Images replaced his face, human worlds dismantled, not destroyed. Fleets turning inward, not outward. Entire solar systems converted into layered traps. We realized the only winning condition was denial, the commander said. Not victory, not annihilation. Denial of access, denial of growth, denial of future. A delegate finally found her voice. Why didn't you tell us? The commander met her gaze through the projection. We did, he said. You voted against us. Silence. You feared the cost, he continued. So did we. The difference is that we accepted it. The feed shifted again, showing the scarred region in its entirety. Not empty, not dead, engineered. This region is not a fortress, the commander said. It is a commitment. Every system here was chosen because it could be sacrificed without ending the galaxy. Every defense was designed to function without resupply, without recognition, without relief. A tremor ran through the council as understanding spread. You stayed here, someone whispered. Yes, the commander replied. We stayed. The enemy surged again, this time splitting itself into countless fragments, attempting to overwhelm the containment lattice through sheer complexity. The human ship's systems flared. Not brighter, deeper. Layers of space folded inward, overlapping like pages in a book slammed shut. Entire approaches vanished. Fragments collided with absence and ceased. Still, the strain grew. The commander felt it through the deck beneath his boots, through the subtle lag in system responses, through the ache behind his eyes. We're nearing tolerance thresholds, an officer warned. I know, the commander said. Adjust priorities. Civilian survival first. The officer hesitated. That will reduce our margin. The commander nodded once. That's what margins are for. Back in the refugee fleet, the commander watched the unfolding battle with a mixture of awe and shame. They had run. Humanity had stayed. The realization burned deeper than fear. The human signal returned one final time, directed not at the council, but at the fleet itself. You are safe for now, the commander said. But understand this. What you are seeing is not our full strength. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. This is restraint, he continued. Because if we fail here, escalation won't save anyone. The signal cut. The human warship held its position, unmoving, unyielding, as the enemy battered itself against a line built not of arrogance, but of acceptance. Humanity had not become conquerors. They had become custodians. And as the strain continued to rise, one truth settled over every watching mind in the galaxy. Whatever the cost of this defense, humanity had already paid it. The only question left was how much longer they could afford to keep paying it alone. The enemy did something no one expected. It stopped attacking. Across the scarred region, pressure eased, not vanished, but redirected. The vast presence that had been battering itself against humanity's line began to pull inward, folding portions of itself away from the defenses. It did not retreat. It reorganized. That terrified the observers more than any assault. In the refugee fleet, Tactical projections flickered as predictive models collapsed one after another. Every doctrine the galaxy had relied on assumed the enemy followed a single rule: relentless advance. Adaptation, yes. Hesitation, no. Why would it pause now? An officer asked. The analyst stared at the data, fingers trembling. Because it's learned something. The commander didn't look away from the viewport. What? That this isn't a wall, the analyst said. It's a blade. And it cuts both ways. Inside the human warship, alarms remained silent. But that silence carried weight. Systems showed rising internal strain. Not critical. Not yet. But the margins were thinning faster than projected. The human commander studied the enemy's new configuration. It's consolidating, he said. Reducing exposure. Preparing for a different approach. Temporal recursion, an officer suggested. Already tried, another replied. Didn't hold. Causality inversion? The commander shook his head. Too expensive. It won't gamble unless it has to. He paused, then added, which means it's looking for something else. The deck vibrated subtly as the ship adjusted its position, aligning itself more precisely with the deepest folds of the scarred region. Around it, the ancient terrain responded, shifting corridors, tightening gravitational knots, closing paths that no longer served the containment geometry. The ship was not commanding the region. It was cooperating with it. Wake the long-range observers, the commander ordered. I want eyes everywhere, especially behind us. The officer hesitated. Behind us, sir? Yes, the commander said. If I were it, that's where I'd look. Across the galaxy, the council chamber struggled to keep up. Streams of human data flooded systems never designed to process them. Not because the information was encrypted, but because it was structured around assumptions no one else shared. Human models prioritized failure. They mapped not what would work, but what would break first. They built their strategy around loss. One delegate murmured, watching simulations unfold. They planned for it. They planned with it, the elder corrected. They assumed loss was inevitable. The question was how to spend it. A younger delegate leaned forward. Why show us this now? The elder's expression darkened. Because they're running out of margin. At the edge of the scarred region, the enemy acted again. Instead of pressing forward, it extended itself laterally, spreading along the boundary like a tide seeking cracks. Not to breach, but to listen. Subtle fluctuations rippled outward, probing not space, but response. The human ship reacted instantly, not by blocking, by exposing. A section of the containment lattice relaxed, opening a narrow corridor that led nowhere of value. A calculated imperfection. The enemy took the bait. A portion of it surged into the corridor, compressing itself to fit the narrow constraints. The moment it committed, the corridor collapsed, not inward, but sideways, flattening into a region with no depth, no direction, no gradient to exploit. The trapped mass unraveled. Still, the enemy did not panic. Instead, it changed focus. Something vast turned its attention not toward the human ship, but toward the refugee fleet behind it. Alarm screamed. It's bypassing us, a human officer shouted. Not physically, conceptually. The commander's jaw tightened. It's targeting probability, trying to reach them through outcome space. In the refugee fleet, lights flickered as systems reported anomalies that made no sense. Shields fluctuated. Engines lagged. Life support registers spiked with false errors. It's not attacking us directly, the fleet commander said, dread creeping into her voice. It's making us fail. The human commander opened a channel immediately. All refugee vessels. This is Human Containment Command. Shut down non-essential systems. Do not attempt evasive maneuvers. Do not think of escape routes. Do not think, the fleet commander echoed. Yes, he said. This entity exploits intent. Reduce it. Against every instinct, the fleet complied. And the enemy faltered. Where it tried to propagate failure, it found emptiness. No ambition. No movement. No branching outcomes to feed on. The human ship advanced for the first time. Not quickly. Not aggressively. It simply reduced the distance. As it moved, space rearranged itself ahead of the hull, clearing paths that had never existed, closing ones that had. The ship's silhouette sharpened, resolving into something almost comprehensible. Weapons ports became visible. They did not glow. They did not charge. They opened. Commander, an officer said quietly, we're seeing internal authorization triggers. These systems haven't been used since ever. The commander nodded. They were never meant to be used often. What are they? The officer asked. The commander hesitated, then answered honestly. They're not weapons, he said. They're decisions. The first activation was subtle. A single point ahead of the ship dimmed, not darkened, but simplified. Complexity drained from the region as variables collapsed into a single outcome. The enemy's nearest structure entered the zone and stopped existing. Not destroyed, not erased, resolved. Across the galaxy, sensors failed as reality corrected itself around the absence. The region smoothed over, leaving behind nothing that could be measured or remembered. The analyst in the refugee fleet stared at her screen. It didn't just remove matter, she whispered. It removed possibility. The human ship continued forward. Each step was deliberate, each activation precise. No wasted motion, no excess force. The enemy reacted with something new. Not fear, recognition. It began to withdraw in earnest now, pulling vast portions of itself away from the line, sacrificing mass to preserve core structures. Entire tendrils were abandoned, left to dissolve rather than risk further exposure to whatever the humans were deploying. It's retreating, someone said in the council chamber, disbelief thick in their voice. No, the elder replied. It's surviving. The human commander watched the withdrawal without satisfaction. Track its vectors, he ordered. It's learning too much. An officer frowned. Sir, if we pursue. We won't, the commander said. We never do. Why not finish it? The commander's gaze hardened. Because finishing it requires escalation. And escalation has consequences this galaxy is not ready to inherit. Behind him, a junior officer finally asked the question that had haunted every human generation since the beginning of containment. How long can we keep doing this? The commander was silent for a moment. Longer than anyone else, he said. That's all that ever mattered. The human ship slowed, then stopped, once again placing itself squarely between the enemy and everything else. The scarred region tightened around it, terrain locking back into its long-held configuration. The enemy withdrew beyond sensor range, wounded but not destroyed. The galaxy exhaled, but the human commander did not relax, because he knew something the others did not yet understand. The enemy had not been driven off by force. It had been taught, and the next time it returned, it would not test the line. It would test the cost. As the ship settled back into its holding pattern, internal systems flagged a new alert, one that had not appeared in over a century. Containment forecast updated. Projected margin, critical within acceptable parameters. The commander closed his eyes briefly. Humanity could still hold, but the era of doing so unseen was ending. And once the galaxy truly understood what the humans had built out here, what they were willing to do to protect it, there would be no going back to ignorance. The weapon that was never named had been revealed, not as a threat, but as a promise. And promises, the commander knew, were the most dangerous things in the universe. The galaxy celebrated too early. Across thousands of worlds, emergency broadcasts shifted tone. What had been evacuation orders softened into cautious hope. Strategic councils spoke of repulsion and deterrence. Some even whispered the word victory, as if the enemy's withdrawal had been anything more than a breath taken before a longer plunge. Only the humans did not celebrate. Inside the warship, the lights dimmed slightly as power was rerouted. Not because systems were failing, but because priorities were changing. Every lumen mattered. Every fraction of a second mattered. Every human aboard felt the shift, even if they could not name it. The commander stood alone for a moment, staring at the containment map. The scarred region pulsed softly, a living equation constantly rebalancing itself. Red indicators blinked at the periphery, not breaches, but stresses. Places where the universe was being asked to tolerate just a little more than it wanted to. Status, he said quietly. Stability holding, came the reply. But only because the enemy disengaged when it did. How long until it tries again? The officer hesitated. Unknown. It may take years. Or minutes. The commander nodded. That, too, was familiar. He turned away from the display and walked deeper into the ship, past sections that had been sealed for decades and others that had never been opened at all. The warship was not designed for comfort. It was designed for longevity. Corridors were narrow. Surfaces were modular, scarred by constant reconfiguration. Every space could be repurposed. Every system could be cannibalized to support another. Human design philosophy, at its purest. He stopped before a heavy bulkhead marked only by a simple symbol, a circle bisected by a line. "Open Archive 3, he said. The door did not respond immediately. Layers of authentication unfolded, biometric, genetic, cognitive. Not to keep enemies out, but to ensure only those who understood the cost were allowed in. The door opened. Inside, the air felt different. Colder. Still. Rows of memory cores lined the chamber, each one containing lives. Not recordings. Continuations. Human minds preserved at the moment they could no longer serve in the present, kept in suspension until they were needed again. Strategists. Engineers. Commanders. The dead who were not allowed to rest. The commander stepped inside and looked at the nearest core. A name glowed faintly. Someone he had studied under. Someone who had trained his parents. Status? He asked. Archive integrity at 99.8%, the system replied. Degradation within acceptable limits. Acceptable. That word again. He activated the first sequence. Across the chamber, lights brightened as dormant minds began to stir, not waking fully, not yet, but aligning. Preparing. The cost of the last engagement had been small by historical standards, which meant the next one wouldn't be. On the bridge, a junior officer watched the commander's return with quiet apprehension. Sir? Archive 3. Yes. The officer swallowed. That means. It means we're entering a phase where institutional memory matters more than innovation, the commander said. The enemy is adapting faster. We need perspective that spans centuries. And the cost? The officer asked. The commander met his gaze. We will pay it. The officer nodded, because there was nothing else to do. Far beyond the scarred region, the enemy moved. Not forward. Inward. It reconfigured itself in ways the humans had not seen before. Where once it had spread wide and consumed everything, now it condensed, refining its structure, discarding inefficiencies. It no longer tested the line directly. It studied the echoes of its own losses, tracing back not through space, but through consequence. It had learned that humanity did not fight to win. Humanity fought to endure. So the enemy began to plan for endurance as well. In the council chamber, the mood shifted as delayed data arrived. Analysts who had initially celebrated now stared at projections that refused to stabilize. Every model that assumed the enemy's withdrawal as a success collapsed under long-term analysis. It's not gone, one delegate said quietly. No, the elder replied. It's thinking. The chamber fell silent. What do we do? Another asked. If humans can hold it, surely we can support them. Send fleets. Resources. Reinforcements. The elder closed her eyes briefly. They won't accept that. Why not? Because they already know how this ends if we interfere. As if summoned by the thought, a human transmission cut into the chamber. The commander's image appeared again, more worn than before. We are receiving your deliberations, he said. We will be direct. No one interrupted. Do not send fleets into the containment region, he continued. Do not attempt to study our systems from within. Do not try to replicate what you see here. A delegate bristled. You can't expect us to do nothing. We don't, the commander replied. We expect you to do what you should have done the first time. He gestured, and a new set of data appeared. Human projections of post-containment galactic stability. Unify, he said. Not politically. Practically. Share logistics. Share infrastructure. Build redundancies. Stop competing for survival and start planning for continuity. A delegate scoffed. That's idealistic. The commander's eyes hardened. No. It's necessary. The feed cut. In the refugee fleet, reactions were mixed. Some felt relief that humanity was holding the line. Others felt a growing discomfort, a sense that they were witnessing something they were never meant to see. The fleet commander watched the human warship in silence. It had not moved since the enemy's withdrawal. It did not patrol. It did not pursue. It simply remained. How many of them are there? She asked quietly. The analyst checked long-range readings. Unknown. But fewer than there used to be. The fleet commander closed her eyes. Inside the human ship, a warning chimed. Containment strain exceeded previous peaks. The commander moved instantly. Report. Localized instability in Sector 12, an officer said. Nothing critical yet, but the enemy's last interaction left a resonance. Can we dampen it? Yes, the officer replied. But it will cost us. The commander didn't hesitate. Authorize. Deep within the scarred region, a star that had been carefully balanced for centuries went dark, not consumed, not destroyed, but collapsed into a controlled null state. The resulting shock stabilized the region, sealing the resonance. Millions of years of potential energy erased. A clean solution. A permanent one. The officer swallowed. That star was one of our long-term buffers. I know, the commander said. He stared at the updated map. Margin reduced. Still acceptable. For now. Later, alone in his quarters, the commander finally allowed himself to sit. The room was sparse. No decorations. No personal items beyond a single worn patch sewn into the wall fabric. It bore the symbol of Earth. Not as it was. As it had chosen to be remembered. He recorded a short log, knowing it would be archived, not broadcast. The galaxy thinks we saved them today, he said quietly. They are wrong. Today, we spend a little more of the future. He paused, then added, we always knew this would be the hard part. Being seen. He ended the recording and stared at nothing for a long time. Because the enemy would return. Not stronger. Smarter. And when it did, the cost would no longer be paid only in stars and space. It would be paid in people. Humanity had stayed awake so the galaxy could sleep. But staying awake forever was never part of the original plan. And somewhere, deep within Archive 3, ancient minds stirred fully for the first time in centuries, aware, alert, and grimly unsurprised. The war was entering a phase no one left alive had ever seen. And humanity was running out of ways to pay the price without being noticed. The first human died 43 minutes after the enemy returned. Not in battle, not in fire. In a quiet maintenance corridor 3 levels below the warship's spine, where a containment relay failed a fraction of a second faster than predicted. The human assigned to it, an engineer named Lien Morado, 6th generation born into the line, had enough time to reroute power manually. She did not have enough time to leave. The system sealed. Space folded. The relay stabilized. And Lien Morado became part of the structure holding the universe together. On the bridge, her life sign vanished. No alarm sounded. None were programmed for that. The commander closed his eyes for exactly one breath. Mark the loss, he said. Continue. Because that was how this war had always worked. Not with dramatic last stands, but with quiet disappearances that made everything else possible. The enemy did not return all at once. It returned carefully. Fragments arrived first, smaller than before, slower, arranged with deliberate asymmetry. Where it had once tested the line with mass, now it tested it with meaning. Each approach was different. Each interaction designed to teach it something new. And each time, the line answered. But the answers were costing more. Across the scarred region, buffers collapsed one by one. Not failures, sacrifices. Systems deliberately burned out to preserve larger structures. Stars extinguished. Regions of space permanently simplified beyond recovery. Humanity was spending irreplaceable assets. Inside the warship, the strain showed. Crew rotations shortened. Sleep cycles grew erratic. Medical systems flagged long-term neural fatigue in nearly every officer. No one was relieved. There was no one else to take their place. Archive 3 is fully active, an officer reported. We're integrating pre-containment command structures. Good, the commander said. We'll need their stubbornness. The ancient minds brought perspective, but also certainty. They recognized the pattern immediately. It's cornering us, one of them said through the ship's internal channel, voice echoing with the distortion of partial awakening. Not physically, logistically. Yes, the commander replied. We see it too. You always knew this was the end state, the ancient voice said. Why hesitate now? The commander didn't answer right away. Because the difference between knowing and choosing was everything. The enemy struck again, this time not at the line, but at the concept of distance itself. Entire regions of space between stars thinned, compressing traversal times to nothing. Not breaches, but shortcuts. If allowed to propagate, the enemy would bypass containment entirely. Alarms finally screamed. Multiple integrity violations, an officer shouted. Not at the line, around it. The commander's hands clenched. The enemy had stopped trying to break the wall. It was going around it by changing what around meant. Options, the commander said. Silence followed. Then, quietly, there is one. All eyes turned to the speaker. One of the ancient minds now fully interfaced, her voice steady with centuries of context. The final lattice, she said. The words carried weight even here. That's irreversible, an officer said. Once deployed. There is no line anymore, the ancient mind replied. Only an ending. The commander stared at the containment map. The projections were brutal now. No optimism left. Only arithmetic. How long does the galaxy need, he asked. The analyst ran the numbers, hands shaking. If we deploy the final lattice, full containment, permanent, the enemy will never reach them. And the cost? The analyst swallowed. This entire region. All human assets inside it. Everyone here. Silence crushed the bridge. The commander looked around at his crew. Humans who had been born knowing one truth. You are already part of the price. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. Transmit to the council, the commander said. Across the galaxy, the human signal opened again. This time on every channel, to every world that still had one. The commander's image appeared, older now than hours before. We are approaching the end of our viable containment strategies, he said. The enemy has adapted beyond sustainable margins. Panic erupted instantly. You said you could hold. You can't abandon us now. There must be another way. The commander raised a hand. The room fell silent. There is another way, he said. But it ends with us. He explained simply. The final lattice was not a weapon. It was a conclusion. A restructuring of space-time across the scarred region so absolute that nothing, not matter, not energy, not causality, could traverse it. The enemy would be sealed out forever. So would humanity. You'll erase yourselves? A delegate whispered. Yes, the commander replied. Completely. Another delegate surged forward. We can help. Send fleets. Evacuate you. The commander shook his head. There is no evacuation window. And no fleet could survive the deployment. A long silence followed. Then the fleet commander, the refugee leader who had first witnessed the line, spoke. You stayed for us, she said. You held when no one else would. Let us remember you. The commander looked at her, and for the first time, something like softness crossed his face. That's why we're telling you now, he said. Because this time, we don't want to be forgotten. He gestured, and data streamed outward, not weapon schematics, not defenses, but everything else. Human history, human art, human mistakes, human stories. All of it, he said. Take it. Learn from it. Don't copy what we did. Understand why we did it. The feed cut. Inside the warship, the countdown began. Crew members moved with quiet purpose. No panic. No speeches. Just preparation. Each person recorded a final message. Not for family, but for the future. Short. Honest. Leon Morato's name was added to the memorial list. It grew. The enemy sensed the change. For the first time, it surged without caution, throwing everything it had toward the shrinking window of possibility. Too late. The commander stood at the center of the bridge as the final lattice armed. Authorization? The system asked. He placed his hand on the interface. Humanity, he said softly, authorizes. The universe folded. Not violently. Decisively. Across the scarred region, space resolved into a final configuration, simple, absolute, and closed. The enemy struck it and found nothing to interact with. No path. No outcome. No future. The line vanished. So did the warship. So did every human who had stayed awake to hold it. Across the galaxy, sensors went dark where the region had been. The enemy was gone. The threat was ended. The silence that followed was different. It was not heavy. It was earned. On distant worlds, people stood beneath unfamiliar stars and felt something they could not name. Not triumph. Gratitude. And somewhere, in the data humanity had left behind, a final message played. One not marked urgent, not marked classified. Just labeled. For whoever comes after. It contained one line. We were never stronger than you. We just chose sooner. The galaxy would rebuild. Differently this time. Because now, at last, it understood the full cost of survival. And it would carry humanity forward, not as conquerors, not as myths, but as the measure by which all future courage would be judged. For a long time, the galaxy did nothing. No celebrations were declared. No fleets advanced. No borders were redrawn. The region where the line had existed was simply absent. Not destroyed, not dark. Just unreachable. Every probe sent toward it failed in the same way, not catastrophically, but politely. They returned data packets containing only a single value. Null. Scientists argued for months. Some claimed the humans had annihilated themselves along with the enemy. Others insisted they had transcended, moved into some higher configuration of reality beyond observation. A few, quieter voices suggested something far simpler and far heavier. They had finished the job. The refugee fleet was the first to fully grasp what that meant. They had been closest. They had seen the human warship not as a legend, but as a presence. They had heard the human commander's voice, not triumphant, not pleading, just steady. When the line vanished, the fleet did not cheer. They powered down engines and drifted in silence. The fleet commander stood alone on the observation deck of her flagship, staring at the place where something vast and terrible had once been held at bay. Her species had words for grief, songs for loss, rituals for the dead. None of them fit this, because grief usually followed a relationship. This felt like inheriting a debt you never agreed to, but could never refuse. In the weeks that followed, the human data began to spread. Not all at once, not recklessly. The final human transmission had included instructions, guidelines on how their knowledge should be handled. What could be shared freely? What required context? What should never be separated from the warnings that accompanied it? At first, the galaxy focused on the technical material, containment theory, systems resilience, redundancy architectures that assumed failure as a baseline rather than an exception. Engineers wept openly as they studied designs that were brutally simple and impossibly robust. But the real shock came later. The cultural archives. Human music that did not glorify war, but endurance. Stories where heroes rarely survived, but meaning did. Art created not for permanence, but for the moment someone needed it. And history, not the polished version civilizations liked to present. Humanity had left everything. Their worst mistakes, their internal wars, their near extinctions, their centuries of arguing over whether the line should even exist. They had not edited themselves into saints. They had left themselves as they were. And that, more than any weapon or theory, changed the galaxy. On a dozen worlds, education systems were rewritten, not to emulate humans, but to understand them, to teach that survival was not proof of superiority, that winning was not the same as deserving to continue. The phrase human margin entered common use. It described the difference between what was required and what was willingly given up anyway. Years passed, then decades. The galaxy stabilized. Trade resumed along new routes, carefully planned to avoid dependence on any single corridor. Military doctrines shifted away from expansion and toward response time, mutual aid, and fallback planning. No civilization was allowed to stand alone anymore, not because of treaties, but because everyone had seen the cost of isolation. A memorial was proposed. At first, it was meant to be a monument near the former edge of the scarred region, a vast structure visible across systems. It was rejected unanimously. Instead, the galaxy agreed on something quieter. Every world would set aside one place, a room, a garden, a stretch of land, where no symbols of power were allowed. No flags, no weapons, no declarations. Only a single inscription, translated into the local language, but always carrying the same meaning. They stayed. Children would ask what it meant. Adults would struggle to answer. And that struggle would be the point. On a small world far from any former human territory, a child once asked her teacher why the night sky looked different in old images. Because there used to be a place no one could go, the teacher said. Why? The child asked. The teacher hesitated, then answered honestly. Because someone was standing there. The child thought about this for a long time. Are they still there? She asked. The teacher looked up at the stars. I don't know, she said. But I think they would want us to believe we don't need them anymore. Far from that classroom, deep in regions the galaxy no longer scanned aggressively. Instruments recorded something strange. Not energy, not matter, patterns, tiny distortions, fleeting and inconsistent, appearing at the very edges of the unreachable region. Too weak to be signals, too structured to be random. Most scientists dismissed them. A few did not. They noticed that the distortions only appeared when the galaxy faced moments of potential fracture, political collapse, resource crises, the first signs of a new existential threat. And that, somehow, the disturbances always coincided with solutions being found just in time. No one could prove a connection. But no one could disprove it either. The phrase human contingency replaced older superstitions, not as belief, as caution. On the anniversary of the line's disappearance, the galaxy observed a minute of silence. Not mandated, not enforced. It simply happened. Ships paused in transit. Factories slowed. Even the most aggressive species found themselves waiting, as if something might still be listening. The refugee fleet commander, now old, stood once more at a viewport, this time above a thriving world that had been settled by many species together. Children of different forms played in shared gravity. Languages overlapped. Cooperation was no longer an aspiration. It was infrastructure. She recorded a message that would be archived with the human data. "We did not save you," she said, voice steady. "You saved us from learning too late. We will try to be worthy of that." She ended the recording and turned away. Elsewhere, in the deepest repositories of human knowledge, one final file unlocked automatically after a set number of years. It was short. No encryption. No instructions. Just a recording of a human voice. Young, unremarkable, tired. "If you're hearing this," the voice said, "then we were right. The galaxy went on without us." A pause. "That's good," the voice continued. "That was always the goal." Another pause, longer this time. "If you ever wonder whether we regretted it, we didn't. Fear, yes. Doubt, always. But regret? No." The voice softened. "We didn't stay because we were better than you. We stayed because someone had to go first." The file ended. Nothing followed. No revelation. No return. No last-minute miracle. Just absence. And in that absence, the galaxy finally understood the full meaning of what humanity had been. Not heroes. Not martyrs. But the quiet proof that survival was not an accident. It was a choice. Made early. Made often. And paid for in full by those who never expected to be thanked.